She stood at the church doors, her baby's tiny white casket waiting inside, and her mother-in-law stepped forward and blocked her path. Not today. Her husband sat in the front pew and said nothing. What none of them realized was simple. They had just locked the owner out of her own building. The morning they buried Eli, Atlanta was the color of ash, cold, still. The kind of mourning that has already decided how it is going to end before anyone arrives. The Calvary Baptist Church on Redmond Road sat at the top of a gentle hill, its stone walls dark from old rain, its stained glass throwing fractured color onto the steps below, deep red and cold amber landing on the concrete like something that had been bleeding quietly for a while. Cars filled both sides of the street for 2 full blocks. The whole community had come out. Suits and black dresses and Sunday hats in February, people moving slowly toward the doors the way people move when the weight of what they are walking into is already on them before they get there. And Lenora walked up that hill alone. Simple black dress, her natural hair pulled back, no earrings, no rings. She had stopped wearing the wedding ring 3 weeks ago and had not explained it to anyone. Just one piece of jewelry, a small brass key on a thin chain at her collarbone. Old, worn smooth in certain places from decades of being touched. It had sat at her throat since she was 9 years old, and she had never taken it off. She did not know yet, climbing those steps, that the key was about to mean more than it ever had. She was 4 steps from the top when the doors opened from inside and Gloria stepped out. Carter's mother, 63 years old, tall, sharp-boned, dressed in black that had been pressed to a crease. She wore the expression of a woman who has made a decision before she left the house and does not intend to be moved from it. She looked at Lenora the way she had always looked at her, like something that had ended up in the wrong place and needed redirecting before it caused any more disruption. She spread her arms across the doorframe, not dramatically, just enough. "Not today, Lenora." Lenora stopped walking. "This is a family service." Gloria's voice was low and calibrated, designed to carry exactly as far as the steps and no further. You showing up like this, alone, without so much as a phone call, without coordinating with the family. It is inconsiderate. You want to grieve? Then grieve at home, like a decent woman. Do not come here and make this mourning harder than it already is. Every sentence was smooth. Every sentence sounded reasonable. Every sentence was a door closing. On the steps around them, people had gone still. A woman near the entrance raised her phone. 2 men near the iron railing exchanged a look. An older deacon near the door found something to study on the ground. The parking lot below went quiet in the way crowds go quiet when they are all watching something they know they will be talking about later, in kitchens and phone calls and Sunday vestibules, and nobody wants to be the one caught looking away. Lenora did not answer Gloria. She looked past her, through the gap of the heavy wooden doors as they swung, to the front pew inside. Carter was sitting there. He was looking directly at her. Dark suit, bowed posture, the expression of a man who knows exactly what is happening and has already decided not to move. He was the same man who had held her the day she told him she was pregnant. The same man who had promised her on a Sunday evening 3 years ago that he would always show up. He held her eyes for one moment across the full length of that church. Then, slowly and deliberately, he turned his face back toward the altar. That was the moment, not Gloria's words, not the crowd or the phones. Carter turning away, choosing the view of the altar over the sight of his wife being blocked from entering their son's funeral. That choice, made in 3 seconds, was the final one in a long sequence of choices that had been building for 2 years, and Lenora felt every single one of them arrive at once, like a closing account whose final number she had always known but had not wanted to read. 2 rows behind Carter, Diane leaned forward from her seat and placed her hand on his shoulder. He accepted it without turning, without acknowledging it. Simply let it rest there the way a man accepts things he has decided belong to him. Lenora stood on those steps and touched the brass key once, quick and certain, the way you touch a wall in the dark when you need your direction. Then she stepped back from the doors. She pulled out her phone. Her voice was so quiet that the woman 2 steps below her heard nothing. 3 words: close it down. Then she folded her hands in front of her and waited. To understand what those 3 words were about to do, you have to go back to when this marriage still looked, from the outside, like something worth having. Lenora grew up in Savannah, Georgia, in a house with a porch that tilted slightly to the left and a screen door that announced every arrival with a small sound of protest. Her grandfather, Elder Winston, was a large and deliberate man who had built a real estate company across 9 states from a single plot of land, purchased with 15 years of wages saved from work that had nothing to do with what he was building toward. He never named buildings after himself, never put his photograph in his own lobby, never talked about money at dinner. He believed, with the certainty of a man who had thought about the long view for a very long time, that the loudest wealth is also the most fragile. The kind that lasts works in the background. He raised Lenora after her parents were killed in a car accident when she was 4 years old. He raised her on ledger books and scripture at the same kitchen table with the same serious tone, teaching her that the world speaks many languages and that a person who can read all of them will never be entirely without power. By the time she was 12, she could follow a property contract. By the time she was 20, she understood the portfolio better than most of his attorneys did. She was 9 years old the morning he placed the brass key around her neck. He held it in both palms first, the way you hold something that requires proper handling, and he told her it opened nothing yet, but that one day it would open everything. He told her the world was going to try many times to make her believe she was ordinary, that her patience was passivity, her quietness was weakness, her refusal to announce herself meant she had nothing worth announcing. He told her, every time that happens, reach up, touch this key, and remember exactly who you come from. She never took it off. Not once in 25 years. She met Carter at 26 at a fundraiser in Atlanta for a community housing initiative, one of many projects her grandfather funded without putting his name on. Carter was warm and handsome and looked at her across a room full of strangers like she was the most interesting person in it. She believed him. She stepped back from the world her grandfather had raised her inside of, made herself smaller, and chose to build a life with this man. Elder Winston asked her not to tell Carter the full scope of what she would one day inherit. He was old-fashioned about one thing. He believed people should love you for who you are before they know what you carry. And Lenora agreed, because she wanted the same thing. She shared enough to answer questions without raising new ones. She was honest without being complete. She thought that was wisdom. She did not yet understand what silence costs when the people around you decide your silence means you have nothing. The trouble with Gloria started before the wedding invitation was sealed. At the engagement dinner, she had been pleasant in a way that had structure behind it. She asked Lenora questions with a smile that never fully arrived. What does your family do exactly? You mentioned real estate, how large an operation. And she held Lenora's answers like objects she was turning over, checking for information she had not yet located. When Carter stepped away from the table, Gloria leaned slightly forward. My son has worked very hard for everything he has, she said. I just want to make sure the woman he chooses understands that. I do, Lenora said. Gloria smiled and reached for her water glass. Good, because Carter deserves complete openness, no hidden rooms. That is what a real partnership looks like. It was the first time she said it. It was not the last. In the months that followed, Gloria placed that same message into Carter's ear with the patient consistency of water finding a crack. Lenora is hiding something, Carter. Why won't she talk about the full picture? What kind of wife keeps that from her husband? A real partnership has no closed doors. Have you ever really pushed her and gotten a direct answer? She never accused directly. She only questioned. But questions repeated enough by the right person into the right ear do the same work as accusations. They create doubt that calculates itself. Carter started watching Lenora differently. One night at dinner, he set down his fork and said, "My mother thinks you're keeping things from me, about your grandfather's company, about money." He said it calmly, like it was a reasonable observation he was relaying on behalf of someone reasonable. Lenora looked at him. "Your mother doesn't know what she's talking about." "Then explain it to me," he said. "All of it. Because every time I ask, I get pieces." "I've told you what matters right now," Lenora said. "The company is my grandfather's. One day it may involve me more. That's the full picture at this point in time." Carter looked at her for a long moment. "That's not a full picture, Lenora. That's a door with a lock on it." He picked his fork back up. The conversation was over. And something between them was slightly different after it. Slightly more rigid, the way wood warps in changing weather. Lenora felt it. She just could not name it without naming the person putting the pressure on it, and Carter was not ready to hear that name. Diane moved into the space this created, not dramatically. She had known Carter since they were children, and she understood, perhaps without consciously knowing she understood, exactly where the warmth had gone out of his marriage and exactly how to be warm in those precise places. When Lenora was quiet at dinner, Diane was easy conversation. When Lenora was tired on a Saturday, Diane was available for whatever Carter needed company for. At a family birthday party 6 months into the marriage, Lenora watched Diane laugh at something Carter said and touch his arm and stay close enough for the rest of the evening that the space between them looked like a habit. Lenora said nothing. She went home early, citing a headache. Carter came home 2 hours later smelling like restaurant food and someone else's perfume. "You okay?" he asked, finding her in bed. "Fine," she said. He kissed her forehead and went to the bathroom. She lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling and felt something she could not yet afford to fully name. She had been raised by a man who read balance sheets for pleasure. She was not going to miss what was accumulating in front of her. She kept believing, longer than she should have, that the man she had married was still in there somewhere beneath all the wrong choices. That patience was the answer, that if she waited him out, he would find his way back to her. She was wrong, but she was still learning then what it truly costs to be wrong about someone you have chosen. The baby shower was the morning Lenora understood she had been wrong for a long time. Gloria planned the entire event, venue, colors, guest list, food, without consulting Lenora on a single thing. The invitation arrived by mail with Lenora's name misspelled. One letter, easy to call a typo. Lenora did not call it a typo. She filed it in the part of herself that was keeping count. At the shower, Lenora sat in the chair of honor, while Gloria moved through the room like a hostess at her own event, receiving congratulations, directing caterers, welcoming guests with expansive warmth she reserved for situations where she had complete control. At one point, a woman from the church caught Gloria's arm and said, "You must be so excited becoming a grandmother." And Gloria put both hands over the woman's hands and said, "We truly are. This child is such a blessing to this family." And did not turn toward Lenora, did not say her name, did not acknowledge by any movement or word that the woman carrying the child was sitting 6 feet away, watching all of it happen. Lenora held her glass of lemonade and kept her face still. Carter arrived 45 minutes late. He kissed the top of Lenora's head without sitting beside her, went straight to Gloria, laughed at something she said, and spent the next 20 minutes in his mother's orbit. When he finally came to sit with Lenora, he squeezed her hand and said, "You doing okay?" The way a person says it when they already intend the answer to be yes. On the drive home, Lenora said, "Your mother didn't say my name once. In 2 hours, not once." Carter looked at the road. "She gets caught up when she's hosting. You know how she is." "I know exactly how she is. I'm asking if you do." "Lenora." His voice had that particular flatness it got when a conversation was already over in his head. "Can we please not do this tonight? Our son is going to be born into this family, Carter. I need to know his father sees what this family does." He was quiet for a long time. Then, "I see a woman who worked hard to put that shower together, and I see my wife who can't just let it be enough." Lenora looked out the passenger window at the passing streetlights. She put her hand on her stomach and felt her son move. She understood, settling into the silence of the rest of that drive, that Carter had already decided which version of events he was going to live inside, and that she could not change that by pointing at it. All she could do was watch where it led. Eli came 6 weeks early on a cold February morning, small and ferocious from the first breath. The NICU staff called him a fighter from the first day. Lenora, who had been raised by a man who turned difficulty into construction material, looked at her son through the incubator glass and recognized him immediately. He was already entirely himself. She sat with him every day, her hand through the small incubator opening, palm up, letting him hold her finger. She read to him Scripture, Langston Hughes, the property law her grandfather had taught her at the kitchen table, because it was the voice that mattered, not the content, and she wanted him to know her voice the way she already knew his face. She sang to him. She told him about Savannah and kitchen tables and brass keys and what it means to build something quietly over a long time and then let it speak for itself. Carter came the first 2 nights. On the 3rd, he arrived at 9 and left before 11. On the 5th, he texted at 7 to say he was running late and never arrived at all. On the 7th night, Lenora was sitting beside the incubator, her hand through the opening when her phone buzzed on the chair arm. "Carter, how is he today?" She stared at the message for a long time. Then she typed, "He held my hand for 20 minutes this morning." Carter replied 2 hours later, "That's great, babe. Long day here. Rest up." She put the phone face down on the chair arm and did not pick it up again that night. On day 8, Gloria appeared in the hallway outside the NICU. Not to sit with Lenora. She stood at the glass and looked at Eli for a few minutes alone. And when the nurse opened the NICU door and saw Lenora coming down the hall, she said brightly, "Oh, your mother-in-law was just here. Isn't that sweet, making the effort?" Lenora smiled and said, "Yes, it is." She went in and sat beside Eli's incubator, and she thought about that for the rest of the morning. Gloria coming to the hospital, coming early before Lenora arrived, standing at the glass alone, making sure she was there first, making sure she had a moment alone with the baby that Lenora did not have, inserting herself at the front of the story even here, even in a NICU, even when a child was fighting to survive. That evening, Lenora called Carter. He did not answer. She sent one message. "Your mother came to the hospital today, before I got here. I need you to talk to her." Carter read the message. She could see the receipt and did not respond until the next morning. She was just trying to be supportive. "Don't read into it, Lenora." She set the phone down and turned back to her son. She placed her hand through the incubator opening and felt his fingers close around hers, and she made a decision in that moment. Not a dramatic one, not one she announced to anyone. She simply decided, quietly and completely, that she was done asking Carter to see what was in front of him. She was going to focus on the person who needed her. She was going to be fully present for her son. Eli fought for 11 days. He gripped Lenora's finger and moved toward her voice. And on the 8th day, he opened his eyes and looked at her with the full focus of a person who is seeing something that matters. She talked to him all morning. She told him he was built from patient people, people who did not break, who carried what they needed to carry, who understood that the right moment requires the right waiting. On a Thursday morning, while she held his hand and told him she loved him in every language she knew, he let go. The machines went quiet. The nurses came and gave her time. Real time, unhurried. She sat in a rocking chair in a private room with her son in her arms, and she let every feeling move all the way through her. The grief and the love and the fury and the loss and all the things that have no names, until it had passed through and settled somewhere she could carry. Then she stood up, placed him down gently with both hands, straightened her dress, touched the brass key. She walked out of the hospital into the cold parking lot and stood in the open air and breathed. Long, slow, deliberate, until she was steady. Carter arrived at the hospital 40 minutes later. He found her in the parking lot. He stood in front of her with his hands at his sides and his face doing the work of a man who does not know how to be present for the thing happening in front of him. He said, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Lenora." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "My attorney will be in touch." She walked to her car. She drove home alone. 2 hours after she got home, her grandfather's attorney called. Elder Winston had passed in his sleep the night Eli was born. The attorney had waited out of respect before making contact. He sent documents by overnight courier after a brief call. Carter's car was not in the driveway when she got home. She did not check where he was. She sat at the kitchen table alone and opened the envelope. The Winston Legacy Group, 47 years of quiet acquisition, commercial properties, residential developments, land holdings across 12 cities and 9 states. Total current valuation, $68 billion. Sole heir, executor, majority owner, Lenora Winston Clark. She sat with that for a long time. She looked around the kitchen of the house she had tried to make into a home, the table where she had eaten dinners Carter left early from, the walls she had painted herself because Carter kept forgetting to call someone, the rooms she had made smaller and smaller versions of herself inside of season by season, until she barely recognized how much ground she had surrendered. She touched the brass key. She thought of her grandfather at that kitchen table in Savannah, holding the key in both palms before he handed it to her. "It opens nothing yet, baby girl, but one day it will open everything." She understood now what he had meant. Not the money, the moment, the specific moment when everything you have been quietly carrying, every year of patience, every silent choice, everything you built in the background while the people around you decided you had nothing, becomes visible all at once, and the people who underestimated you realize, simultaneously, what they were standing next to the whole time. She picked up her phone and began making calls. The night before the funeral, Carter came home at 11. Lenora was at the kitchen table with property assessments and transfer documents spread in front of her. She did not move them when she heard his key. He walked in, loosened his jacket, looked at the papers without reading them. "You should sleep," he said. "Tomorrow's going to be hard." "I know," she said. He went to the refrigerator, opened it, stood there without taking anything. "My mother has everything coordinated for the service. She just wanted it to be right." Lenora looked up from the papers. "She coordinated our son's funeral." "She was trying to help, Lenora." He closed the refrigerator. His voice had that practiced evenness that meant the conversation was already over in his head. "That's what she does." "Where were you tonight, Carter?" He set his glass on the counter. "I had things to handle." "With Diane." The kitchen went completely still. He did not deny it. He did not confirm it. He looked at the counter for a moment, then at her. And what was on his face was not guilt exactly. It was the expression of a man who has decided that being caught is the other person's fault for looking. "Don't do this," he said quietly. "Not tonight. Not the night before we bury our son." Lenora looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned back to her papers. "Good night, Carter." He stood in the kitchen another beat, waiting for something she did not give him. Then he went upstairs. She stayed at that table until 2 in the morning, not because she needed to read the documents again. She stayed because she needed to sit in the truth of what she was holding a little while longer before the morning came. 40 minutes after Lenora made her call, 3 black SUVs pulled into the church parking lot. The people standing outside, those who had been on the steps when Gloria blocked Lenora, those still talking quietly in the parking lot, saw the vehicles first. They went still. 3 black SUVs do not arrive at a church funeral in February without meaning something. 2 attorneys in dark suits got out and walked toward the front doors carrying a single certified document, a property deed, notarized, bearing the seal of the Winston Legacy Group. They did not rush. They did not perform. They walked the way people walk when the documents they are carrying speak loudly enough on their own. The woman who had raised her phone on the steps, the one who had filmed Gloria blocking Lenora, was still in the parking lot. She raised it again now. The attorneys presented the property deed to the head deacon at the door. The Calvary Baptist Church on Redmond Road, the parking lot, the entire block surrounding it. All of it had been acquired by the Winston Legacy Group 11 years earlier as part of a community preservation initiative. The congregation had been notified at the time and had operated under a standing arrangement ever since, because the owner had never needed anything from them. Until 4 days ago when the ownership transferred. Until this morning when the new owner had been blocked at the doors of her own building by a woman who had lived inside the building's grace for 11 years without knowing who to thank for it. The attorneys informed the deacon, politely and in writing, that the building's owner had requested the service be paused, temporarily, long enough for the owner to enter and take her place beside her son. The deacon read the deed, read it again. His expression moved through several things in quick succession: confusion, then understanding, then something that looked very much like recognition of exactly what kind of mourning this was going to be remembered as. He nodded once and went inside. Inside, Gloria was mid-sentence at the podium. She had found her rhythm, talking about Eli as a gift returned to God, about family and legacy and the grace of the Lord. The room was quiet and heavy and with her. And then the deacon walked to the front and leaned in and said something close to her ear. Gloria stopped speaking. "What?" Her voice came out sharp enough that the front 3 rows turned. The deacon handed her the document. She looked at it. Her hands did not move for a moment. Then they tightened on the paper. She looked up at the deacon. She looked toward the back of the church. The people sitting near the doors could see the attorneys through the glass. They could see something happening in the parking lot. The whispers started low and moved fast. "What is happening? Who are those men? What does the paper say?" And the whispers reached the middle pews before Gloria had found any words at all. She looked at the deed one more time. Her face went through something it had almost never gone through in public. The expression of a woman who has just understood that the ground she built everything on was not hers, had never been hers, and that the person she had turned away at the door 40 minutes ago had always known that. This cannot. The doors opened. Lenora walked in. No rush, no tears, the same black dress, the same stillness, and the brass key catching the amber light from the stained glass above the entrance, throwing a small, warm piece of color down the center aisle, as she moved through it. The murmur started at the back and moved forward like a current through tall grass. People leaned toward each other. The property deed was already being passed hand to hand through the back rows. The attorneys had brought copies, and the whispers it was generating had a specific texture, the texture of a room full of people, recalculating something they had believed was settled. She owns this building. She owns this block. They blocked her at the door. She owns this building. Carter turned in the front pew and looked at Lenora walking toward him. Something moved across his face that had no single name. It was built from every moment he had not moved when he should have, arriving all at once, all too late, in a church where there was nowhere left to look away. Diane's hand left his shoulder. She placed it carefully in her own lap and did not move again. Gloria stood at the podium with the deed in her hands and the expression of a woman who has just watched the room she controlled for 40 years recognize in real time that her authority had never been what she thought it was. Lenora walked all the way to the front. She stood beside Eli's casket. She placed her right hand on the white wood, gently, precisely, the way she had placed it through the incubator opening when he was 11 days into his life. She closed her eyes. One moment. Just for him. Then she opened them. She looked at Gloria at the podium, still gripping the deed, still searching for footing she was not going to find. And Lenora spoke, quietly. She had never needed to be loud. "You can step down now." Gloria's mouth opened. Nothing came. "This is my son's funeral," Lenora said, "and this is my building. Step down from that podium, or my attorneys will have the service relocated. That is not a request. You have 10 seconds. The church held its breath. 1 second, 2, 3. Gloria stepped down. She walked from the podium she had stood at for 40 years and took a seat in the pew, 1 row further back than she had been before, because the front row now belonged to the woman who owned the building. Carter lost the house within 6 weeks of the divorce filing. The down payment had come through a subsidiary lending program under the Winston Legacy Group. Carter had applied years ago and never thought to ask why the terms were so favorable. He understood now. Lenora's legal team was methodical and unhurried, and Carter, who had spent 2 years making choices based on the assumption that her patience meant she had no moves, discovered that she had always had more moves than he could count. He called her 19 times in the first month. She answered once. "My attorneys will handle everything," she said. "Take care of yourself, Carter." Then she ended the call. He stood in the kitchen of his new apartment, a 1-bedroom with a broken elevator, nothing like the house, and replayed that voice in his head, the same voice she had always had, soft, even, not a trace of satisfaction or cruelty or performance, just the voice of a woman who had finished with something and moved forward. It occurred to him, standing there alone, that she had always sounded exactly like that. He had just been too busy listening to his mother to understand what it meant. Diane was gone before the divorce finalized. No conversation. She simply became unavailable, first slowly, then completely. She had been drawn to Carter's stability and his family name and the ease of a man who moved through the world like it was arranged in his favor. None of those things existed anymore. She moved on without ceremony. See, Carter understood eventually that she had never been there for him. He had been a position. When the position changed, she relocated. Gloria's world contracted quietly over the months that followed. The story of what happened at Calvary Baptist moved through the Atlanta church community, the way true stories always move, faster than anyone could stop, accumulating weight with every retelling. The woman she had blocked at the door had been the owner of the building the whole time. That fact was immovable. The women who had deferred to Gloria for decades began, one by one, to stop. Not loudly, with the kind of withdrawal that is slower and more complete than any confrontation. The phone call not returned. the committee chair given to someone else, the pew that is no longer guaranteed. Gloria stopped attending Calvary. She tried other churches and found the story had traveled. She retreated into a smaller life. Not because anyone drove her there, because the thing she had spent her life protecting had been taken from her by the simple, patient return of consequences she had set in motion herself. 6 months later, Lenora drove herself home to Savannah. She took the highway south in early morning, before Atlanta had woken up. The landscape opened as she moved toward the coast. Flatter, wider, Spanish moss beginning in the trees, the sky becoming something you could see the full extent of. She had the windows cracked. It smelled like clay and approaching rain. She had nowhere to be at any particular time. That freedom was still new enough that she was still learning whether it felt like peace or emptiness. That morning it felt like peace. The house was exactly as she remembered. The porch still tilted left. The screen door still made its sound when she pushed it open. That small, familiar complaint. Exactly like it had always been, unchanged by everything that had happened since she last heard it. The kitchen still held the smell of old wood and paper, and the particular quiet of a place where serious thinking had been done across many decades. She stood in the doorway for a long moment before she went in, just stood there with her hand on the door frame, letting the house recognize her. She sat in her grandfather's chair, both hands flat on the surface of the table. She felt the grain of the wood under her palms, the specific texture of a surface that had been used with intention for a very long time. And she let herself be still in a way she had not been still since before the hospital. She thought about Eli, not the machines or the cold fluorescent light or the sound of monitors or any of the things she had spent 6 months trying not to picture. She thought about his hand closing around her finger on the 4th day, that small, certain grip, saying something that needed no words. She thought about reading to him at the incubator opening, about telling him about this table and about the key and about his great-great-grandfather, about the morning she told him he was built from patient people. She hoped he had heard her. She believed he had. She was going to go on believing it. She lifted the brass key from her neck. For the first time in 25 years, she held it in both palms, the way her grandfather had held it before he gave it to her. She looked at the engraving, faded but still legible. She looked at the places the surface had worn smooth, the places her fingers had always found in difficult moments, reaching up without thinking, finding what they needed. She stayed with that for a while. Then she put it back on. Some things you do not put down, not because you still need what they were given for, because they are part of the shape of who you became in the carrying of them. The key was not a key anymore, not really. It was 25 years of one man's belief in her, worn smooth by every hard morning she had gotten through. She opened her grandfather's final ledger, sent with the estate documents with a handwritten note that said simply, "For Lenora, when she is ready." It was not a financial record, it was a map of decisions in his handwriting, explaining not what he had acquired, but why. This block because the families there needed ground that could not be taken from beneath them. This building because a congregation deserves security they do not have to worry about losing. This street because if you hold the ground under something, you protect its future even when the future has not arrived yet. This city and this one, each with a reason rooted in the same belief, that wealth is not for showing, it is for protecting the people you love. Page after page, 47 years of choices made from a single intention. She read every page. Then she closed the ledger and looked out the kitchen window at the old oak in the backyard, the one she had climbed as a child, the one her grandfather used to stand under on summer evenings and look up into, and she was still for a long time. $68 billion, her name on all of it. And what she felt was not pride or triumph or anything that resembled the emotions she had expected to feel when she finally arrived at the other side of all of this. What she felt was the weight of intention. Her grandfather had not built an empire. He had built a shelter, an enormous, patient shelter designed to protect the people who needed protecting, operated quietly for decades so that it could keep doing that work long after he was gone. Now it was hers to carry forward, and she already knew how to carry things. She had been learning her whole life at this table, in this house, with his key at her throat. She was 34 years old. She had survived a marriage that spent 2 years making her invisible, a grief that would take the rest of her life to fully hold. A Tuesday morning in February, when she was blocked at the doors of her own building and told she did not belong there, in front of a crowd, with phones raised, by the 2 people who should have been standing beside her. She had survived all of it without breaking, without becoming hard, without losing the part of herself her grandfather had built in her. The patience, the precision, the absolute certainty that the truth does not need to be loud. It just needs to be true and given enough room to breathe. She was still here, at his table, with his key at her throat, and everything he had built was waiting. If this story moved something in you, like this video, subscribe to this channel, share it tonight with someone who has been told they do not belong in a room they were born to own. Come back for the next story. It is already waiting, and it carries the same weight, the same truth. They called her cold. They called her secretive. They blocked her at the doors of her own building on the morning they buried her son. In front of a crowd, with phones raised, without flinching, she let them, because she had learned something a long time ago at a kitchen table in Savannah from a man with large hands and a low voice, who placed a brass key around her neck and told her to be patient, to be precise, to let the truth do what it does when you give it enough room. Lenora Winston Clark did not need to raise her voice. She owned the building.